regulation has been a big topic of discussion and question over those past 2 days. So I'm particularly happy that we're here today to talk to you about it. You know, and as I was walking into this venue, sort of buzzing with people interested in AI, I had this fleeting thought of what was the pre-AI era like? And of course, AI is a term and as a technology has close to 7 decades of history behind it. And although many people have dedicated their lives to studying and developing AI over those 7 decades, for the vast majority of us, AI did not occupy the mental and at times emotional space that it occupies today. So when did so many of us become interested in AI? And sort of looking across the rooms, I can imagine that there must be fascinating stories of AI moments and developments that sort of captured your imagination and brought you to where you are today. For me, the sort of first wow moment, the first time in my life that I sort of dropped everything to follow a news story about AI, was Lee Sedol's series of games against AlphaGo. There was something almost surreal, but also so captivating about seeing those games of Go played out in front of the world between one of the best players and a computer program developed by DeepMind. And those games feel like forever and a lifetime ago, but they took place almost only 8 years ago, almost precisely 8 years ago, actually, between the 9th and the 15th of March, 2016. So much has happened since then, not only in the world and in our lives, but in AI as well. We are so much further now than we were then. I had no idea back in 2016 that one of the challenges for me in 2024 would be to figure out which academic papers were written by a human and which ones were written by ChatGPT. Yet, here we are. And as AI became a bigger and bigger part of our lives over the past years, governments and international organizations have turned their attention to AI governance. In 2015, the year before the famous Go games, AI was mentioned a total of 7 times in UK government publications. Last year, in 2023, it was mentioned 608 times. Now, if you are an AI policy geek, this is a tremendously exciting time to be alive. And some of the brightest minds in the world have been thinking about how to regulate AI. And we're at the point at which we are starting to see the results of all that work. We have the tremendous fortune of having with us today some of the minds that were behind landmark AI policy positions taken by the UK, the European Union, and the United States. And as you will be listening to them today, please keep in mind 3 things. The first is that we are at the very beginning of AI regulation. What we're seeing are the first steps in what will inevitably be a very long journey. The reason I wanted to take you back to 2016 is because we often forget that AI hasn't lived this extensively in our minds and in our lives for all that long. The second is that AI regulation is hard. Understanding what the best path forward is at a national, multinational, or global level is very hard. And I don't think we have the answer yet, but what we have are some proposed answers and an enormous opportunity to learn over the next few years what works and what doesn't. And the third thing to keep in mind is that the UK, the EU, and the US are home to only about 10% of the world's population. 90% live in other jurisdictions. Some of these jurisdictions have fascinating AI regulation initiatives, and my hope is that next year we'll be able to bring some of these voices here at AI UK. China, for example, was one of the first countries to implement AI regulations. Brazil is on its 4th proposal for a comprehensive AI bill. Singapore has released a wealth of voluntary governance frameworks for AI. India is working on a digital act to replace its now 24-year-old IT Act. Apart from these national level initiatives and many others, There are also multinational efforts with organizations like UNESCO, the African Union, the Council of Europe, working on multilateral AI governance frameworks. So what you'll be hearing today is a good introduction to how 3 jurisdictions are thinking about AI regulation, but there is a much greater world out there. With that, I'll turn to Lizzie, who is the Deputy Director for AI Regulation within the Department for Science, Information and Innovation and Technology. Lizzie is leading work on the UK government's overall regulatory strategy, and her team is behind the most recent AI regulation publication in the UK, namely the government's response to a pro-innovation approach to AI regulation consultation. Lizzie, the UK opted for a principles-based approach, no new legislation for now, and relying on the deep sectoral expertise of the country's regulators. Can you tell us a bit more about that approach and what the current thinking is in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thank you so much for convening today's discussion. I think maybe I would say this given my job title, but I think kind of working out how we establish the right guardrails for governing AI so we take advantage of its extraordinary benefits and innovation that it offers, but also make sure it's done responsibly and safely, I truly think is kind of one of the most critical questions of our time, and it's also a kind of deeply international question. So I think that's why today's discussion is so important, and pleased to be sharing the panel with others here. You asked for a little more detail about the UK's approach, and yes, last month we published the white paper response, which set out an update on the UK's approach, saying how we're delivering on the white paper, which was published in March last year, but also importantly providing an update on how our approach is evolving in response to this fast-moving technology and some of the big questions we're still grappling with. So what did it say? I guess the headline is that it reaffirmed the UK's commitment to a pro-innovation approach, one that is context-based. And to say a little more about what I mean here, in the white paper we outlined 5 key principles covering themes such as safety, fairness, transparency, and we asked that our existing regulators interpret and apply these within their domains. So thinking through, for example, how they might issue guidance to their sector so they understand how to use AI in a safe, responsible and innovative way. And we've been pleased to see a number of regulators already taking action in this space. So for example, we had our competition authority, the CMA, launching a review of foundation models. The ICO has long been active in this space, and I think you might be hearing from Stephen Almond later. So for example, publishing an update on how data protection applies to AI. But we know there's plenty of further work to do to make sure all of our regulators are equipped and ready to think through the huge opportunities but also challenges of AI in their domains. And one of the other things we did in the white paper response was we wrote out to key regulators asking that they publish their AI plans by the end of April, which will, where we've asked them to set out what they're doing to better understand the risks and opportunities in their domains, what steps they're taking to upgrade their capabilities, how they're thinking through how to address AI, but also some of the potential kind of challenges or gaps they think they might have in that toolkit. And I think that should hopefully provide a really kind of useful insight into kind of where UK regulators are today. Are you happy that I keep elaborating?
Please.
Great. Our approach, as you said, is non-statutory for now, but in the white paper we did say we think that we might need to introduce a statutory duty for regulators to regard this framework, just recognising that regulators are statutory creatures and that gives them an important mandate, but we do think one of the benefits of our non-statutory approach is it has given us that kind of flexibility to kind of test and iterate, but we are kind of keeping this under review. On how it's kind of landed, I thought maybe it'd be worth saying a tiny bit on that. Broadly speaking, for the UK, stakeholders have felt that they like this approach. They like that it recognizes AI as not unregulated, and that it allows for our regulators to take a kind of targeted and nuanced approach, which enables us to make the most of their sectoral expertise. But one of the things we did do, and this is kind of in keeping with our kind of test and iterate approach, is in the white paper we set out plans to establish a central function, and this is something we provide a bit more of an update on in the white paper response. And we did this actually in response to earlier stakeholder feedback we'd got on a 2022 policy paper, which said, we like that you're saying you want to deliver through existing regulators, but how will coordination work? How will you ensure you have a kind of grip of risks across the landscape? And so this central function, which we're in the process of setting up, is undertaking risk monitoring across the whole ecosystem, so trying to spot potential gaps in our approach, but also identifying where there could be systemic risks. It will be promoting coordination between our regulators, and it will be supporting their capabilities and knowledge exchange. And so we provided a bit of an update on what we're doing in this space. So that risk analysis function is now up and running, and we've been pleased to bring together a very interdisciplinary team who will be shortly publishing an AI risk register, which sets out our kind of first cut of risks across the whole ecosystem. We're in the process of setting up a steering committee for key regulators and government representatives to join to help ensure that kind of overall coherence of the ecosystem. We're launching a new fund to support regulator capabilities, and we will be particularly interested here in making sure that fund is available to some of the less mature regulators, but also how we can use the fund criteria to incentivize cooperation between regulators, which we see as really critical in this space. A few other updates, including we publish guidance for regulators thinking through how they implement their principles. We noted our ongoing review of regulator powers, and we provided an update on our work with the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum and a kind of integrated advisory hub that they are offering to AI and digital innovators. And so the aim of this central function is precisely to address the challenge that arises with a context-based approach, which is this kind of overall coordination and coherence piece. People like the nuance and the proportionate approach it enables, but the challenge it prompts is how do you make sure regulators are working together, especially where a company, say, falls in between 3 or 4 regulators' remits. How do you make sure that it is a streamlined, coherent landscape? And so that's the aim of this function. So that gives you a kind of overview of where we're at in terms of delivering on the white paper. In the response, there was another really important section in it, which outlined our work on highly capable general purpose AI models. In the AI white paper, we had said that we needed to do further work to understand how our approach, how a context-based approach applies effectively to models that are inherently cross-sector. And in the white paper response, we provide an update on this, setting out the case for targeted binding measures to apply to these most powerful AI models, recognizing that our existing regulators cannot always reach up the AI life cycle in a way that effectively mitigates risk. It's worth saying here that ministers have been clear we're not rushing to legislate, and ministers are very clear that they think it's important that our understanding of the risks mature, and this is where the work of the AI Safety Institute is so important, and we've been really pleased to bring talent from a range of leading frontier AI companies as well as academia to conduct safety research, undertake evaluations, and support information exchange and collaboration with international partners. And the AI Safety Institute will provide that absolutely kind of critical insight into our governance approach at the frontier. We also then set out a number of questions, and I know others on this panel are closely considering these, and indeed have kind of set out their initial views on them around how we measure risk effectively. So when we're, if we think that targeted measures are required, kind of who might fall in scope, how liability, how accountability sits across the AI lifecycle, what is the respective role of the different actors, what our approach should be to open source. And we make clear we don't have the answers on these questions at this point in time, but that we're absolutely committed to working with externals, including, I hope, many of you in this room, around what the right answer to these questions might look like. And then finally, and perhaps this speaks to the theme of this panel most closely, we recognize just how deeply international AI is. So, of course, many of the AI developers are operating across borders. The risks we're dealing with, these are common challenges where international coordination will be kind of critical, if not essential, in some instances. And we're also very mindful that a competitive regulatory strategy will demand kind of interoperability across regimes. Lots of the UK-based companies are not just seeking to operate within the UK, and so that coordination piece is critical for that reason too. We are very so we think it's kind of fundamental to be working closely with international partners, and that was why we were so pleased to convene the Bletchley Summit last November, where we were pleased to bring together a range of international leaders, but also company CEOs, and we were pleased that both the US and China attended that. Which I think really speaks to just quite how important and quite how international promoting frontier AI safety is. And we're really pleased to be progressing this discussion at the upcoming Republic of Korea and France summit. And I should say that this is not the only fora that we're doing international work, and of course we are pursuing kind of lots of work bilaterally, but also through existing multilateral fora from the OECD to G7, and I could go on. But yes, I guess I might end by saying this is, and this speaks to Cosmina's point at the start, this is kind of certainly not the final say. We probably threw up as many questions as we asked, but we are really at the kind of early stages of working out how to govern this technology effectively, and we think this is where the kind of flexibility and adaptability of our approach is hopefully valuable. But yeah, really looking forward to this afternoon's discussion. It's certainly a very important but complex challenge, so I think working together on it is critical. Thanks, Cosmina.
Thank you so much for that, Lizzie. And no, this is, as I said, this is hard. And just to give just an idea of the scale of the coordination required, you spoke about the sort of centralized mechanism. And the UK has what, over 100 regulators? And some of them have thousands of employees, a lot, really, really sort of deep data science and AI expertise. And some of them have just one person sitting in some location somewhere in the country. So bringing all of those sort of organizations together is a highly complex challenge. But thank you so much. We'll shift gears a little bit to a jurisdiction that opted for the introduction of sweeping new legislation that will apply to all AI systems placed or used within the European Union. And it's my pleasure to introduce you today to Dan Nechita, who's the head of cabinet for Dragos Tudorache, a member of the European Parliament and the rapporteur for the EU AI Act. Dan, the EU AI Act is ready for prime time. Can you please tell us how the EU got to where we are today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Cosmina, and thank you, the Alan Turing Institute for inviting me. Lovely to be on this panel. Hi, Lizzie. Hi, Daniel. I'll start maybe by saying what the rationale is for introducing this, what you call sweeping legislation. I'm pausing for a second because I'm hearing the echo. I was warned that it will happen, but I'm just getting used to it. So indeed, we are trying to not necessarily regulate all of AI. It started with the question, what is it the right mechanism to leverage AI in Europe and to support its uptake. And there are two basically areas. Okay, now it's better with the background. Now I'll try to be more coherent. So there are two ways of acting on this, right? One is to promote trust in the technology, and second is to promote excellence and to promote the adoption of technology and the development and innovation and so on. And the regulation comes in on the part that deals with the trust. That is, if you remember back in the day, especially in some of the um, more new countries to the digital economy, we had a real problem with the bank cards, right? So people would go when their salary was in, they would go to an ATM and would basically take out all their money and then use it cash. And it's the same thing with technology. In order for it to have massive societal uptake of this technology, you need to build trust in it. So the part on the regulation is just for building trust in the technology. At the European Union level, we also have a lot of initiatives stimulating that other part, the ecosystem of excellence, so supporting startups, providing funds. There was a very important announcement recently that Europe is opening up its supercomputers to startups to run their models on that. So I wanted to frame really well where the legislation comes in. Indeed, it is a horizontal legislation. So that means it applies to everything in all different domains, but it is targeted. It is a risk-based regulation that is targeted to only a limited number of AI systems on the market. And at the point when the legislation was proposed, those were estimated to be around 10 to 15% of the AI systems. I think now we worked and the scope is a little bit larger, but I'll get into that later. The way it is structured, it's based on let's say visually, a pyramid of risk. At the very, very, very top, we have a few AI use cases that we feel are in total dissonance with what our European and, I would say democratic values are wherever around the world we rely on a democratic system. So systems that are used specifically for mass surveillance, for targeting citizens and basically assigning them, for example, a social score. Those are systems that we don't really want in Europe. So those are outright prohibited. Those are very few, and those really are just stating the obvious. We are promoting a democratic society. Then the bulk of the regulation applies to what are now called high-risk AI systems. Might as well could have called them category 1 or category 2. They're not inherently dangerous, but the way that they're used and the context of their use can present risks to health, safety, and even more so to fundamental rights. And I'll get back to the high-risk AI systems. Then we have, going down towards the bottom of the pyramid, you have a category of medium risk systems that could be, for example, misleading. Those are deep fakes, chatbots that interact with people. And for those, there's really just a narrow transparency requirement so that the end users know when they're interacting with an AI system and not with a human, or that they're seeing something that was AI generated. And then the very bulk of the pyramid is all the other AI systems out there. So in agriculture, in transportation, in all other areas that have absolutely no legal requirements from this regulation. So the bulk of it is basically targeted at the high risk AI systems. Now those is for now are a finite list. that were considered based on impact assessments and how exactly and unprecedented, where we've seen that they've affected fundamental rights and they had an impact. For example, biometrics, AI used in critical infrastructure, AI used specifically to make decisions about education, employment, provision of essential services, and of course, law enforcement, migration, and democratic processes. For those, we have indeed, and just last week actually we finalized all of the voting process on the AI Act. We have indeed adopted a set of rules that deal with making those systems safer before being placed on the European market. So those rules are intuitive in a sense, right? So the providers of those systems need to have a risk management system in place so that they can mitigate risks when they arise. They need to have good documentation. They need to have good data governance. They need to have transparency. They have to have good cybersecurity measures in place. And there's got to be some sort of human oversight over the decisions that are, an output of these models. So in a big picture, that's what the EU AI Act does. Most of the obligations in the AI Act, indeed horizontally, so in all sectors, deal with those risks that can pose significant risks with those systems that can pose significant risk to health, safety, fundamental rights. Now, of course, we have tried to future-proof the regulation, and we could not ignore the fact that more and more the conversation, and not just the conversation, but the actual developments in the market deal with very powerful general purpose AI models, which do not really neatly fit into that pyramid of risk, into a high risk use case. For those, we have taken an approach that is very similar to what both the UK and the US have done in a sense. So we have a limited set of very basic obligations of transparency and documentation, which probably happen anyway in responsible companies. And then for the very, very powerful models out there, we have, again, what I would call commonsensical obligations to have a risk management system in place, and even more so to have a channel open with the regulator so that when incidents arise and they're observed in the development stage, or when there is a need for evaluation of those models, that the providers can work with the regulator and make sure that their models are safe. And this regulator in our case is a newly established AI office that sits in the European Commission, and which in the conversation part, I will argue, is very, very much well placed to be connected with the AI Safety Institute in the UK and in the US. And I think that there's a lot of room for cooperation there. So I hope this gives an image of what we have done in the EU AI Act. And I have to say, we have walked a tight line between supporting and promoting innovation and ensuring the protection of fundamental rights for the more immediate, not necessarily longer term, but for the more immediate and tangible risks that some use cases of AI might bring. But nevertheless, this is basically covering a limited number of use cases. And within the Act, there are a lot of measures also in support of innovation, such as, for example, the requirement for every member state to establish a sandbox for startups and SMEs to go test their models, make sure that they're compliant. So I'll stop here with the introduction. I think I'll have a lot more to add, and I'm sure my colleagues too, on the cooperation and what are the next steps. after this little overview of what the EU AI Act does.
Super. Thank you so much, Dan, for that introduction. So we will hop across the pond to the United States, which has a very interesting mix of executive orders, such as last October's executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence, non-binding frameworks, such as the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, and government initiatives that led to voluntary commitments from leading artificial intelligence companies to manage the risks posed by AI. We're very lucky to have with us today Daniel Remler, who is the Artificial Intelligence Policy Coordinator at the US Department of State's Office of the Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology. Daniel, can you please take us through the US's approach and thinking?
Thank you, Cosmina, and thank you to the Turing Institute for the invitation for this great event. I want to start with just some of the prehistory of the U.S. approach, and by prehistory I mean things that happened more than 12 months ago. So, we, as the EU and the UK, have been working on AI governance, AI sort of pre-regulation for a long time. So, Cosmina, as you mentioned, we had the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights that came out in October of 2022. We had the NIST AI Risk Management Framework that came out in January of 2023, as well as previous executive orders on how the government uses AI itself, actually. And the Blueprint and the Risk Management Framework were both grounded in a risk-based, context-specific approach to AI, trying to encourage innovation while mitigating the risks for different kinds of specific cases in the use of AI, again, reflecting the nature of this technology as a dual-use technology. Last year, with the evident improvements in AI technology that captivated the world, the United States had a sort of renewed focus on what our governance and regulatory approach to AI was and should be. So the president and the vice president and other members of the administration engaged with civil society, industry, labor groups, et cetera, on formulating first a set of voluntary commitments with initially a tranche of 7 leading AI developers, finally 15. So those voluntary commitments were first announced in July, and the intention was to move quickly to set some common sense guardrails around ensuring safe, secure, trustworthy AI, as well as to stake out the view that this technology should be used, harnessed to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, such as combating cancer, combating the climate crisis, improving education, et cetera, and that research as well should be dedicated there. And again, our view was that this was a way to move quickly to set some broad norms that we could then build upon through an enduring framework through executive action and eventually legislation. So then the executive order came in October of last year, and this is a very long executive order. Some call it the longest in American history. I don't exactly know how you fact check that, but that's what I'm told. And the idea, straight from the president, was for the U.S. government to pull every lever on AI and AI policy, balancing, managing the risks while promoting responsible innovation. And at a broad level, much of the executive order essentially directs agencies across the federal government, such as Health and Human Services, the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, the Federal Trade Commission, et cetera, to use their existing authorities in the context of AI as it's impacting their areas. So, for example, the Federal Trade Commission will be examining the implications of AI in the AI industry for antitrust and competition policy, the Labor Department analyzing how AI may be impacting workers and how to continue to protect workers. And all this is grounded in a set of principles at the beginning of the executive order, laying out the broad view of the administration in the United States government for AI. So this is protecting consumers, protecting workers, promoting innovation, ensuring competition, safeguarding civil rights and equity, ensuring that the federal government itself is able to harness AI, et cetera. And from our point of view, this is a way to ensure that we are actually leveraging the existing expertise and authorities of our federal regulatory and administrative agencies. A lot of them have been doing work related to AI in their areas for a long time. So I want to give particular shout out to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which has had guidelines and frameworks for artificial intelligence in medical devices. So a lot of them already have this kind of expertise, and now we are further empowering them, giving them further impetus to use that expertise, to use those authorities as AI is impacting their areas, again, to manage the risks while promoting innovation. Another element of the executive order that's also crucial, and actually Dan and I were sort of talking about this before the event, but another really critical and important piece of the executive order is to bring in more AI talent to the federal government to ensure that we have guidelines for how federal agencies can use AI responsibly, but also actually take on those capabilities, because it's going to be very difficult to have an effective AI policy without policymakers that actually can use these tools and that have that talent. And we need to get better at leveraging the technology and that talent. At the same time, the executive order also directs the U.S. government to study and analyze some emergent issues. Some of them have already been raised before by Lizzie and Dan. So, for example, the reporting requirement for some very large AI models that will help us better understand the kind of capabilities of these kinds of models, as well as a report that the Department of Commerce will be writing on the risks, benefits, and implications of so-called open source AI. We call it models with widely available weights. And essentially the view is that these elements deserve greater scrutiny, but exactly where or how remedies or mitigations need to be put in place through policy, through governance, through regulation has yet to be determined. And so we need to just focus on studying these issues more. And then another piece that's sort of derivative of the executive order is, of course, the creation of the U.S. AI Safety Institute. This is intended to develop, very similar to the UK's AI Safety Institute, of course. This is intended to develop, science-based, empirically grounded guidelines for AI measurement, risk management tools, et cetera. And this also is supported by a consortium, the AI Safety Institute Consortium, that brings together stakeholders from industry, civil society to support the work of the Institute developing these guidelines, these science-based approaches to risk management tools. And it will be carrying forward some of the work that is in the executive order, such as guidelines for content authentication and provenance. And there are some other efforts from the executive order similarly trying to build capacity within the federal government to do these kinds of things. So for example, the Department of Energy is working on a test bed to do red teaming tests and things like that. Now, in terms of next steps, my previous two panelists have already said much the same, but international cooperation is obviously hugely important. Domestically, we are continuing to implement the executive order. So we passed the 90-day mark back in January, where we completed every item due in the executive order, which is fantastic. And the 180-day mark is coming up at the end of April. We've laid the groundwork already for a lot of future action at these future dates and sort of on an ongoing basis. So for example, the Department of Health and Human Services stood up a task force to provide regulatory clarity and catalyze innovation in AI in the medical sphere. And so that will continue to spawn new actions. And of course, a lot of the reports that I just mentioned will also be coming up later this year that would prompt a new period of assessment for how, if at all, policy needs to be adjusted. And the president, of course, himself has said that he supports bipartisan legislation on artificial intelligence, and Congress has been working on this in a bipartisan manner. Again, internationally, we can talk about this more in the discussion, but the US, EU, and UK have already worked quite well together. So the G7, I think, was a highlight for us last year, where we developed a code of conduct on organizations developing advanced AI systems. Again, that reflects a kind of commonly understood set of guardrails for these advanced AI systems. And we also work together on a resolution in the UN General Assembly on seizing the opportunity of safe, secure, trustworthy AI to advance sustainable development. That's made significant progress, and we hope to see adopted soon. And crucially, that UN General Assembly resolution forges a global consensus on 2 pillars for AI. The first is, again, the need for some guardrails, but also the need, really the imperative, to leverage AI to make progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, where the world is falling woefully, tragically behind. And I'll just end my remarks by saying that obviously we cannot ignore the need to manage the risks. We have spoken and will speak about regulation and governance in our jurisdictions, but our citizens and those of other countries are also, particularly in low and middle income countries, are looking to us to see how we can use AI technologies to solve some of the world's greatest challenges and to close some of the digital divides and other socioeconomic divides around the world. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much for that, Daniel. And thank you so much to all 3 of you, actually, for giving us, highly concentrating briefings on what ultimately are very complex and long documents. And we're going to have a Q&A session. I have a few questions prepared for the panel, but I realize there are many of you in the room. There are about 800 people online. So we'll take some questions from the room. I'll keep an eye on Slido to see what questions come from the audience. But please do submit your questions, and we'll try to answer as many of these as we can. But I'll kick off the Q&A with a question to all of you, which is, what keeps you up at night, if anything, when it comes to putting your jurisdiction's approach into practice? And maybe we can start with you, Lizzie, and then move on to our online panelists.
So I was going to say, what keeps me up at night? My baby. But more seriously on AI. So I guess there's a few things, but I won't dive deep because I know we've got limited time. So I think, look, we know the policy questions, the policy development is big and complex, but I think we mustn't lose sight of the delivery aspect to this as well. So how do we actually make sure our businesses, our public services, our regulators have the capabilities they need to make the most of this technology? I'm sure others might speak to the kind of the international coordination challenge, which I think is vital, but tricky, thinking through what are the structures we need in the long run. And then I'm just nerdily really interested in how might the policy-making process itself need to evolve. So how will it keep pace with this fast-moving technology? What are the things we might need to do differently to design the policy we need?
No, absolutely. Dan?
Well, I think Daniel just hinted at our conversation earlier, and I think we kind of pre-agreed that, but I'll let Daniel pick up on his thoughts. That talent, attracting talent, not just so this has 2 components. Not just attracting talent for innovation and for supporting basically what we want to do with AI is to have it help us evolve our societies, to help our economies, right? And that is a problem all across Europe. We're not forming enough specialists. But then on the other hand, when we think from a regulatory perspective, attracting talent into public service is really, really a challenge that we're going to be facing. The more and more AI will be present everywhere, right? So we need to have the right people in public service who understand it and who can interact with this fast-moving technology. I would say that the resources are, again, a problem, because the European Union has a limited budget as a union, and so resources at the European level to put all of the European mechanisms in place is keeping me up at night. And then, characteristic in a sense of the EU, but also a challenge that might be present in the US in some form or another, is fragmentation, because now once we pass this, the AI Act at European level, now member states have to adapt it and to implement it locally. Of course, some will be more ready than others to implement it. Nevertheless, we have foreseen a lot of a very complex structure of coordination among the member states, of sharing best practices, of harmonizing, basically that's harmonization legislation. We have foreseen all these mechanisms, but now, and you probably all know that in this particular mandate, we've passed not just the AI Act, but many other pieces of legislation dealing with the digital domain. And I think right now, over the next few years, the big challenge will be to make them all work together. So I think that there's going to be a lot of effort dedicated to implementation. So I would say those are main concerns as of now.
Dan, can you remind us what the EU plan is for implementation? So each country gets to decide what it wants to do?
This is a regulation, so it applies automatically, but of course, member states need to pass their own version of it, respecting what the EU regulation says. But then, there are moving parts in terms of the implementation. So each member state needs to have a national supervisory authority, but because member states have different ways of organizing the government, each member state will have to make a decision who the supervisory authority is and where exactly is it nested within their own government. Some, for example, have a preference for the data protection agencies. Some have established literally an AI agency, that's the example of Spain, and some will probably, give it to an agency within their digital ministry and so on. So this whole landscape will need to settle once member states start actually implementing the act.
Thank you. Daniel.
Well, I couldn't disagree with anything that Dan and Lizzie have said. Talent is essential. Implementation is essential. I would add that I think we need to get the actual technical solutions right, because there are a lot of open questions in terms of, at a very practical technical level, how to operationalize some of our ambitions for making AI safe, secure, and trustworthy. So that's having robust content authentication and provenance mechanisms, that's having replicable red teaming tests, other kinds of safety testing, things like that. Again, these kinds of tools for safe, secure, trustworthy AI that do not overburden companies, particularly small, startups, but that actually do mitigate the risks that we care about and that we understand those risks in an empirically grounded, science-based way. What makes me hopeful about our ability to do that actually is our ability to partner with the private sector, with civil society, to actually develop those guidelines. So the AI Safety Institute consortium that I mentioned, that will bring together AI developers and other parts of the AI ecosystem with the US government, is going to be crucial to doing that effort. This is a problem we all need to work together, or set of kind of problems or issues that we need to all work together to solve, as well as in cooperation, coordination between the US AI Safety Institute, the UK AI Safety Institute, the EU AI Office, other similar partners, around the world. So.
Super, thank you. You all mentioned international cooperation, and I wanted to pick up on that. Actually, some of the top questions that we get on Slido are on the international dimension. So two closely related questions. One is, what is the most promising channel for the US, EU, and UK to work together? And a second question is, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're talking about sort of 10% of the world's population here. So what do you see as the most sort of promising avenues to drive a global conversation around these issues, around international collaboration on AI regulation? Dan, I might start with you this time.
Definitely. You probably know, Cosmina, from our recent meeting that both Dragos and I are very passionate about international cooperation and especially about this potential triangle, which is, natural. Everybody can see it. We have three emerging institutions that are tasked with almost the exact with the exact same, in a way, mission. So I think it's really, really, really important that this conversation, this triangle, continues and evolves. And I think it's happening already. So, I think it's a very encouraging sign. The most promising avenue for cooperation at this point is because, first, we're dealing with different regulatory traditions, right? So when you talk about regulation, it gets complicated. But I think that we're all already aligned in the idea that we need to have a closer look at the very powerful models out there and to see, what are the systemic risks, challenges, developments. It might be, amazing opportunities that we don't know of. So I think that's the first area of cooperation in dealing with the large general purpose AI models. Which will be natural, and I think that's a very good starting point. I would choose that one if I were to choose just one. In terms of broader international cooperation, I think indeed many of these efforts, and I don't necessarily believe that they are concurrential in a sense. I think the more groups and the more overlapping structures we have, the more we promote international cooperation. So I think the UK summit was an excellent initiative, and the format was and the focus on a particular category of risk plus the format, more extensive format, was good. I think there's work being done in the UN as well now. It's always more difficult in the UN, of course. It's a larger group of actors that need to be involved, but there is work being done now on consulting on what could be some common principles. And I think starting from the SDGs and not just thinking about the risks, which would be probably an agreement would be okay on the more substantial, let's call them existential or very, very large civilization risks, but then also focusing on leveraging technology, as you said, to bring it to help us accomplish the SDGs, to help us make progress there, and to basically move from those 10%, as you said, to a larger and larger coverage. So I'll stop here. I could go on and on and on about international cooperation, but yeah.
Super. Lizzie?
Maybe it's a good sign that I would basically agree with a lot of that, because it perhaps supports the idea that international alignment will be something we can pull off together. So yeah, look, we're having, it's an ongoing discussion already, but I think it's quite striking in just even today's panel, quite how much opportunity there is to be working together, and the fact we're grappling with really similar questions and challenges, as well as opportunities. I would agree that I think when you consider some of the risks that the most powerful models present, this is where international, so some of the kind of safety and security risks, this is where international coordination will be really very critical. And I think it's kind of useful and helpful that as you look at the US, EU and UK approach, we are all thinking about, yes, what does AI mean in particular sectors, domains? And I know we've kind of come at it not in entirely the same way, but I think we're also then all looking kind of up the value chain at the case for kind of targeted measures for the most powerful models. And I think that's a kind of really useful opportunity for us to be working together. And there is already kind of important foundations here through some of the international fora that have been referenced, including the summit. But even going beyond that, I just think there's a huge opportunity to learn from one another, and I think it's quite kind of noteworthy. We've all been starting to talk about some of the kind of delivery issues, which are, actually thorny and critical to this brilliant policy thinking actually being effective. So yeah, how do we boost talent? I think these are all things we can learn from one another. And then thinking more widely, so to the kind of how we work more effectively with other countries. Yeah, I think it's just easy to, for these discussions, especially when it's regulation, to kind of end up talking a lot about risk, but we know that there's huge opportunities here too. And when we think about some of the opportunities that AI can be used to address, things like climate change, transforming how we deliver healthcare, these are all things where I think it will be really critical for us to be working with a wide range of partners to think through how we're deploying AI effectively.
No, thank you. You're making me very happy because that's exactly what I sort of wanted to hear. Because it's a our discussion is turning into quite an optimistic one. Daniel, your thoughts?
Well, once again, Lizzie and Dan have already said much that I can agree with. I would just following Dan's comment about cooperation between the AI safety institutes and AI office, that kind of deep technical collaboration that really happens at the kind of researcher to researcher level is really crucial. And I would just say that, the US, UK have already demonstrated our ability to work quite well together through the G7 and through other kinds of fora and venues last year. And I'd be remiss in my duty as a diplomat not to cite our other partners and allies like Japan, like Korea, that are quite technically capable, that are quite interested in this conversation. And, in the case of Japan, is also standing up an AI Safety Institute. And so we need to really look to working with them as well on all this. And then just picking up on Lizzie's final comment on, using AI for good, I think that, to me, Cosmina is the way to really broaden the conversation out to the rest of the world. Because, again, as I said in my opening comment, a lot of the kind of more risk-focused conversation that we can have here in the North Atlantic is, sometimes in the global South seen as a bit of a luxury. And while they certainly care about managing the risks, they also care about harnessing the benefits of AI. And I think there's a lot of practical work that we can do, us three as well as other partners and allies. So at the UK AI Safety Summit, the US, the UK, Canada, our three development agencies, plus several philanthropic organizations and private sector organizations announced a donor partnership on AI to pool together foreign assistance and other kinds of financial resources to support entrepreneurs in Africa able to use and leverage AI. And so that kind of donor partnership, I would love to see it broadened out to include the EU and other like-minded partners within the G7 and elsewhere, again, to align our our foreign assistance financial resources to advance progress in the Sustainable Development Goals in the Global South. That's the kind of way I think we can really expand the conversation, consistent with what we are already doing with the resolution in the UN General Assembly, which, again, emphasizes the importance, the imperative to use AI for the Sustainable Development Goals.
No, that's great to hear. Thank you. One question that is being upvoted on Slido is, with elections this year across the UK, US, and EU, how will this affect previous efforts and direction? And for that, I'm probably going to pick on the person who has the easiest answer to this question, which would be Dan at the European level.
Yeah, indeed. I think, on one hand, when we think about the regulation, it's very easy. It's not going to affect anything because we have voted. It's done. It's going to be published soon in the official journal of the European Union, and that is, that's the law of the land. If we had a lot more time to discuss the challenges that we see ahead in terms of shifting ideologies and how that's going to play out in the elections and what that will mean for governing the digital domain, that's a very big conversation. It's here in Europe on one hand, but it's in other parts of the world as well. So it will have an effect on implementation. It will have an effect on, what rules might come down the road. But in terms of the AI Act, indeed, Cosmina, it's, it's done and sealed.
Done and dusted. Daniel, could I call on you next? It looks like Daniel might be struggling a little bit.
Sorry, Cosmina, I didn't hear you call my name. I should have maybe expected it. What I can say is that artificial intelligence policy is being considered in a truly bipartisan way here in Washington, and it's an area where across the political spectrum we understand the kind of risks, challenges, opportunities in the technology that will persist and have a lot of continuity beyond just this year. I think it's in some ways it's great that we have elections happening around the world this year, kind of in the wake of a renewed focus on AI, because it's a moment for democracies like ours to prove our ability to move quickly, to take decisive action, things like that. And it's especially great to be having this conversation after some recent negotiations in Strasbourg on the Council of Europe's Committee on AI Framework Convention, because that instrument really shows that despite the obvious differences that exist between us on how exactly we want to govern AI this way or that, it's really a demonstration of our unity as democracies, our respect for the rule of law and fundamental freedoms, and a showcase, a contrast between the way we approach AI policy, again, regardless of party or sectional interest, the way we approach AI versus authoritarian regimes around the world. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I'd just echo those points. This is a kind of long-term global issue which countries across the world are grappling with, and that kind of any government will be taking very seriously. And I think, as we've seen today, even kind of countries' regulatory blocks with varying philosophies can actually find a lot of grounds where there's a big opportunity to be working together and collaborating.
Super. I think we have time for one more question from the room. There are a number of hands going up right here in the front row.
Thanks so much. It's been a brilliant panel. A number of you mentioned the United Nations, and particularly Daniel, the US UNGA resolution, which I think is very well calibrated. What does good look like coming out of the Summit of the Future in September and the Global Digital Compact for AI? And sort of associated with that, what are the opportunities to cooperate with China on AI governance, and what are the roadblocks to be able to do that?
Thanks. Does anybody want to go first?
Maybe Daniel, is he?
Daniel.
Yeah, sure. Excellent questions. So, the reason why we thought that this was the right moment for the UNGA resolution was first just the broader urgency of the AI moment to set guardrails to kind of forge global consensus on AI, to set these guardrails while also to use it for these Sustainable Development Goals, but also kind of in the context of the UN calendar, as you put it, with the Global Digital Compact coming up later this year, the Summit for the Future. And we saw this as an important exercise to forge consensus at the UN for member states' vision of AI to really support that process. So, I think if the Global Digital Compact can take what's been developed with the UNGA resolution, build on it, refine it, but really take the essence of that, that will look like success. It'll kind of set the bar for the world's vision that this is a technology that can and should and really must be harnessed for good to close divides, to make progress in socioeconomic goals around the world. So that's what success would look like to me. And then in terms of opportunities for cooperation with the People's Republic of China, on the sidelines of the APEC summit last year, President Biden and President Xi, agreed to continue discussions on AI, and we are working on that. As others, I'm sure, have made the point here today, artificial intelligence is an issue affecting all countries around the world, and in that context, as Lizzie said, in terms of bringing the PRC to Bletchley last year, it's a conversation that really requires the good faith input and participation of all countries to some extent. So, we're just at the beginning of these kinds of discussions at a global level, never mind in kinds of in the context of one specific state or another. But this is in terms of governing AI, in terms of addressing the risks and harnessing the benefits, it's a conversation that really deserves input and participation from countries around the world.
Are there any additional thoughts that you want to add to that, Dan or Lizzie? If not, we can take another. Oh, Dan, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Maybe just to add to what Daniel was saying, I'll be brief. I think that there is room to cooperate globally, and I think that there are certain issues, like, for example, setting some guardrails for the most extreme cases of what could go wrong, and working on some global issues like global warming. But the challenge there is that, from the AI Act perspective, is that the AI Act is really fundamentally based on, a set of democratic values and on democratic principles. And that is a conversation that I think, needs to continue and to be, it's a point to be made that the purpose of what we've done, for example, is the protection of fundamental rights. So this component also needs to be part of the more global conversations. But other than that, of course, there are areas in which there already can be agreement, and I'm hopeful that it will be at the global level.
Super. I think we have time, actually, just looking at my clock, for one more question from the audience. Sorry, it's a little dark to see. We'll take it right here in the middle.
Thank you very much. My name is Juraj Korba. I'm the chair of IGO OECD. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I have one question which relates to the practical aspects of regulating AI. We've spent months at the OECD trying to define what AI is, and now even updating the definition. I wonder if I may ask the distinguished guests to the discussion how they see the challenges there in distinguishing AI on one hand from what we call classical software on the other hand, and maybe even more broadly regulating AI in a way that takes into account the wider spectrum of digital environments, such as digital platforms, data management, Internet of Things, digital finance, and so on. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for that question.
Maybe I should offer to go first, as other panel members came in on the previous question. So, in the policy paper that we published back in 2022, and in the white paper, we set out instead some kind of key features that we thought made AI distinct and therefore warranted a bespoke approach. So features including kind of it being autonomous and adaptable. And we thought this is why your kind of standard digital regulation, why we kind of needed a kind of AI bespoke approach. I think the thing is, as you think through, I've said that ministers have been clear that they think every jurisdiction will end up legislating. I think thinking through how that could and would translate into statute probably means that we will need to be doing kind of further work to kind of work that out. But maybe our colleague who's been working in the EU AI Act can say more on this. And then on your question about like interactions with the broader kind of digital landscape, I guess only to say that I think this is kind of hugely crucial, and I think it is kind of at the heart of the UK regulatory approach, is that actually decisions we make on data policy, decisions we make on competition policy, these are all things that are deeply relevant to how we govern AI. And this is where we hope there are kind of strong benefits to our approach of bringing together kind of regulators so we actually truly understand that interaction. But I shouldn't kind of do down quite how kind of complex that is. But yeah, you can find me offline, but I think there's loads of super interesting questions that you get into, which is, how should we even be conceptualizing what AI models are? But I won't take us down that rabbit hole when we've got a 0 flashing.
No, but thank you for that, and thank you for the question, actually, and for the work that the OECD does. And a lot of the national and international approaches are built on that. And looking at the principles in the UK approach, they're very much informed by the OECD work. And maybe I can turn to you, Dan, because the EU AI Act relies on the OECD definition, does it not?
Yeah, I was about to feel very sorry if the clock went to 0. I didn't get a chance to give a shout out to the OECD, because we've worked very well together at the technical level in conceptualizing and coordinating, especially from the European Parliament, in coordinating what this definition should look like. So I think that you'll find that the definition that we have and the definition that the OECD has are almost to the comma the same, and I've seen that the NIST, in some NIST documents, it's pretty close to that, and also in the executive order, I think that there's space to converge on taxonomy, and then go down into understanding more and more about what we mean by every single term. I had a lot more about the question before, but I'll stop here, about how to distinguish between AI and more traditional. That's another panel in and of itself.
Super. Daniel, do you want to add something to that as well?
Just to also sing the praises of the OECD as being a really important body that all three of us engage with, and that is hugely supportive of our efforts and the efforts of others for AI governance. And I will say that this is a challenge in the AI space that seems quite fundamental. How do you define what we're actually talking about? But is wrapped up in the challenge of this as a technology. So in the context of semiconductors, let's say, there are specific technical kinds of specifications that you can hone in on as distinguishing different kinds of chips. Whereas in AI, it's a little bit more qualitative. So we'll just say that, as Dan says, it's probably a discussion better left for another time. But it's a real challenge. But I'm glad that the work of the OECD helps us stay kind of more or less on the same baseline.
Super. Well, look, thank you so much for those questions. That was a brilliant question to end on. I have a flashing 000 here that was initially in green light, and now it's in red, all red. So I think I'm going to wrap the panel here. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists today. Thank you so much for being here with us.